Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, a video series by the Singapore Democratic Party where we interview opinion makers and leading figures in Singapore. And leading figure is an apt description of our guest today. He is a medical doctor by profession and one of the rare Singaporeans who will speak up on the political control in Singapore, to the extent of throwing his lot with the opposition. I am of course talking about Dr. Wong who contested in the 2001 general elections with the National Solidarity Party. He has since been analysing the state of politics in Singapore and has been making his views known through the internet. We are glad that he's here with us today. It's a pleasure to have you on Let's Talk, Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Teck Lek. It's also my pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking you about the fear factor in Singapore's politics. You had written about this in SG Politics. In the piece you said, quote, "There is another reason why we have reached the miserable and pathetic situation where people are afraid to speak their mind and politics is shunned. This is related to the stage of our moral development." Unquote. Can you elaborate?
Singaporeans have been sort of, made to think that their livelihood, their future, and everything depends on the government. They have been tuned to look up to the government to provide them for their needs. And, so when it comes to, like things like upgrading and all, they sort of look towards the government that, they are going to, only the government can help them. And so as a result, Singaporeans become very selfish. They only think of their stomach and their shelter. So there is no, when you don't have feel for the community, you don't have any idea about abstract things like democracy, justice, and equality, then I think we have not reached that moral state of development.
Now, the PAP government says it wants to promote an inclusive society. But is the ruling party really walking the talk?
You cannot have an inclusive society if you only include people who think like you. You cannot have an inclusive society if you exclude voices that are, dissenting voices. Then you end up with an exclusive society of groupthink conformists. In short, to have an inclusive society, you must have more democracy.
You took part in the 1997 general elections as an opposition candidate in a GRC. And after the elections, you sort of faded away from political limelight, but lately you have been active again. Is there any significance to this renewed activism of yours?
I've not really changed. There is no fade in or fade out. I've been interested in politics since I was young because I grew up in the Rochor area, which was then a hotbed of political activism. I'm not really a front man, and I never thought of standing for election. So the question is, why then did I contest the 1997 election? At that time, I found the PAP getting too arrogant and getting more and more intolerant of alternative views. Policies were just pushed down the people's throat. And at that time, I was also criticizing the opposition for putting up low-quality candidates like all Singaporeans. Then one day, I asked myself, if everyone only knows how to criticize the opposition for putting up low-quality candidates, then how are they ever going to put up good candidates? So, if I think that opposition candidates are lousy, then what am I doing? Why am I not standing for election in their place? Why am I criticizing these people when they are doing their duty for the democratic development of the country, and I'm not.
As a medical doctor, why are you so interested in politics, which is generally a field dominated by lawyers?
Medicine is actually a social science, and politics is nothing but medicine on a large scale. So, lawyers see politics differently. They enjoy the cut and thrust of debate. But doctors tend to see a country's problem as a disease and try to look for solution to the problem. Therefore, it's therefore not surprising that many doctors have been politicians. People like Dr. Lee Siew Cho, Dr. Lim Hock Siew, Dr. Po Su Kai, Dr. Chi Pui Hang, Dr. Patrick Kee, Dr. Tan Cheng Bong, and Dr. Mahathir, just to name a prominent few.
Singaporeans lament the high cost of healthcare. Is there any basis to their concerns, or do you think the costs are necessary to maintain the standard of medical care in Singapore?
Now, to bring down the healthcare costs, everyone has to play a part. First, the patient. The patient has to reduce his expectation and have a rational understanding of healthcare. For the really needy patient and without any medicine, the government should automatically pay for this patient without the patient having to apply for Medifund and all. They can use a Medifund automatically to pay for the patient. Because most of these patients who cannot afford, healthcare are the patients who won't know how to apply for such things anyway, And then the government should also make sure that the public hospital adopt a rational approach to secondary and tertiary healthcare. In other words, the doctors must be trained to be mindful of healthcare costs to the patients and cut out expensive procedures and expensive treatment.
In one of the forums in which you spoke, you mentioned about the fear of Singaporeans when it came to voting for the opposition. Do you think that this is a major obstacle when it comes to the election of opposition MPs?
When I contested the 1997 election, my relatives were worried for me. My friends avoided me. My patients left me. And some educated people called me up after the election to tell me that they wanted to vote for me. But then when they went into the booth and their names were called and IC recorded, they decided otherwise. And even if you look at the internet nowadays, you see a lot of nicks and anonymous posting. And these are actually symptoms of fear.
What is your take on the recently passed Public Order Act?
Which person who believes in democracy and the basic right of an individual to express himself would support this act? I cannot understand the rationale behind this act. In the past, we allow, less than 5 people to form an assembly. And now we say that one person is a threat, So it's simply not logical. And I think it's just an infringement on the basic right of an individual to express himself.
I'm afraid I have to leave it at that, Dr. Wong. I'd like to thank you again for taking time off to be with us.
Yeah, thank you, Teglek. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Until the next episode of Let's Talk, I am Chia Tilek, and on behalf of the Singapore Democrats, I wish everyone all the very best.